comes out of our joint work with the two departments, microcystin and fish. Did some work in 2012, collected some fish from a number of lakes with blooms. We needed to get over this perception that, or we needed to get a better understanding our fish in the lakes bioaccumulating microcystin. Well, microcystin does not generally accumulate to a high extent. It's water soluble. But regardless, we did do some fish collection with fisheries staff and working with Department of Health. We looked at microcystins in fish muscle and in liver. This past year, the same fish, we dissected the livers and tested the livers for microcystin. And we are not finding any microcystin in fish fillet or fish liver to this point. But our work is not completed on that yet. The other component to the overall cyanotoxin monitoring in the province, of course, is the program in our Department of ESRD. And that started in 05 when we started incorporating microcystin monitoring into all the lake water quality monitoring for the province. This was on Moonshine Lake this year, where I'm assessing new technology to measure chlorophyll in surface water. Again, not likely for our use, but for the beach monitoring program. So this program generates a lot of data. It's used widely now. We have a number of grad students across the country using our data for microcystin monitoring. We do microcystin analysis generally now for all of our lake work. We're starting to do more of the counts for cyanobacteria, species composition, enumeration and identification as well. Hopefully get a better understanding of what is driving increased growth of cyanobacteria in our water in lakes in Alberta. Lake monitoring in the province is not a single program. It's a number of programs, including the OMS Lake Watch, Long-Term Lake Network, which is ESRD, Provincial Parks Program, Chris's Central Lakes Program, Southern Lakes and Reservoirs Program, which is ESRD. So we have a number of lakes. We generally monitor up to about 50 lakes in any given year. And in addition, we may have some other more detailed work on other lakes that wouldn't be captured. But generally, the monitoring, this is how we conduct our lake monitoring. So it's a network of programs, essentially. What we know from that network of lakes from 05 to 2012, and now I can extend that to 2013 because I do have data. We do know this is microcystin levels. What you have to look at here, I don't know why these are all white, they should be now. Anyway, looking at the bars, these are samples that have microcystin levels. I can tell you that year to year, the amount of microcystin in lakes is highly variable. We have years like 05 where we get very low levels of microcystin in lakes. Most of the samples, in 63 of the samples in 05 were in up to 0.5 micrograms per liter, so really trace levels of microcystin. However, we get bad years. 06 was bad for Pigeon, but I said for most of Alberta, 07 was particularly bad year for us. We had microcystin exceeding 40 micrograms per liter, overall surface water quality, or overall lake average concentrations. These are not beach concentrations. Be aware of what's on Long Beach is. It can greatly exceed 20 micrograms per liter. In fact, we had the one case several years ago, a shoreline bloom sample from Isle Lake reached 15 milligrams of toxin per liter. 15,000 micrograms of toxin in a bloom sample, and that's the highest I've seen. So we get up to 2 to 3 orders of magnitude higher levels of microcystin along beaches versus overall lake concentration. But this is to show you that overall lake concentrations generally quite low. We generally don't exceed the surface water or the recreational water quality guideline of 20 micrograms per liter, but we do get cases where we do. In 07 again, we had bad conditions in 07. 2011, not very low toxicity year. Where does Pigeon Lake fall in this? Pigeon Lake may have blooms, but Pigeon Lake's blooms are generally very low toxicity. In that trace 0.5, maybe up to 1 microgram per liter. There's a couple cases where we are 3 micrograms per liter. But Pigeon Lake, even though it does support a lot of cyanobacteria growth, they're non-toxin producing species, or the species, if they are toxin producing, are just not producing much toxin. So that is a good thing for Pigeon Lake compared to some other lakes where we get very high levels of microcystin toxin. So what happened in 07? I'm almost done my little presentation because I know you're all getting hungry. 07, so what happened in 07? just speaking broadly for the province, it was a very bad year for toxin levels, very bad year for blooms. We didn't have a beach monitoring program in 07. If we did, it would have been, the phone would have been ringing off the hook. But I went back thinking, okay, 07, I took one particular lake that was really bad in 07. And we have a long history data on Baptiste Lake, going back to the, well, even into the 70s. But I looked at water temperature at 1 meter depth. I just picked 1 meter depth as representing surface water temperature. And I looked at, okay, our full data set over that 30-year span, what it was the water temperature. Well, generally, water temperature in Pigeon Lake, or in Baptiste Lake, surface water temperature, will reach in the 20s, low 20s. However, I'll note that the reproductive rate of cyanobacteria increases with water temperature up to a maximum of about 30 degrees. So as surface water warms to 30 degrees, reproduction of cyanobacteria is going to increase greatly. And that's what kind of, I was wondering, it was our lakes were warmed up and stratified early on in 07. Ice was off early in 07. We had warm conditions in 07, so I thought I'll look at water temperature. Looking at this database of not just Baptiste Lake, but almost 4,000 temperature records from 1 meter depth over 30-year span for Alberta lakes. In 30 years, we only had 11 cases where water temperature either met or exceeded 25 degrees. You gentlemen from the States, our water's cold here. 11 cases of water at the surface, 1 meter depth, reaching or exceeding 25 degrees in 30 years of data. Doesn't speak well for our recreation here. And it so happens that 7 of the 11 cases occurred in 2007. So our water was warm in 2007. And I think 2007 we started to see the whitefish die-offs occurring, certainly in 07. It was starting to hit the fan on the whitefish. We had warm water. And that, I think, translated to this issue of significant reproduction and growth of cyanobacteria, let alone the surface accumulation issues that we see broad scale across the province. So having warm water in this province would, in my view, really exacerbate the problem. So that's the sciencey side, and some considerations there. In terms of where we're going now, it was about a year ago, almost a year ago exactly, that the former minister of our department of ESRD had us go out to meet in a number of discussions with the public and stakeholders around the province and discuss 4 issues on water. One of those topics on water was healthy lakes, because she knows the people at Pigeon Lake very well, and they know her very well, and there's a lot of interest in lakes from our former minister of this department. We know she's no longer with this department, unfortunately. But the water conversation started a year ago. That was about a 2-month series of meetings. I went to a number of those 21 meetings I attended, speaking about healthy lakes in the province and what are the issues, hearing from the public. Well, we certainly heard from representatives from Pigeon Lake at a number of those meetings. What this means for us, or what this kind of ties into, is basically an overall outlook for a policy development for healthy lakes in the province. I said to a few of you earlier, we don't have a policy on in-lake treatment per se. We have rules and regulations on chemical addition to lakes. We have, the Water Act and the Environmental Protection Enhancement Act that says what we can and can't do in a natural surface water body. But there is a big appetite now by the government to address lakes in the province. And this, it's fortuitous times. I'll give credit to Pigeon Lake because I think, I think they had a big hand in the government going this direction, and this is a direction I think that we need to go. We need to look at how we manage our lakes in the province. We need to look at, what is the appetite for in-lake treatment, and do we want to go down that road? I think for some lakes we have to. So the government now is undertaking a more major initiative looking at a lake policy framework. The Alberta Lake Management Society is a big proponent, and has several meetings already with the government. So we're going down this road. I can tell you now in this room that the government is using this work with the Pigeon Lake group as possibly setting the stage for how we're going to conduct this work elsewhere around the province. simple as that. But I know Chris, people have looked at Chris and myself at times and said, those guys just don't want to do in-lake treatment. Not necessarily true. The point of it all, and the point of going down this road for healthy lakes, is understanding what is going to be right for our lakes. What is the appropriate science and science requirements? What is the appropriate technologies? We're not, Chris and myself don't want to go and suggest you go and dredge every lake in the province when that's not necessarily the thing we need to do. So this ties back in now the road with where we're going with new policy development on lakes in the province is going to address the in-lake treatment, I think, in a big way, or at least a part of that. So that's where I'm leaving it because you guys are all hungry.
What happens to a bloom when it dies?
Starts off, that high sunlight intensity will kill it near the surface.
Where does it go finally?
It settles out, it just breaks apart into, disperses. Toxins are liberated if there's microcystin toxin. And then the natural other bacteria in the water body will break it down. So there's degradation by bacteria and it settles to the sediment, of course. There's degradation by sunlight will actually break the microcystin toxin down. So lakes detoxify naturally by high sunlight intensity. Bacteria eat the microcystin toxin. There are certain bacteria that actually degrade the toxin. But everything gets degraded in the water body over time.
Do you take any account of climate change as your...
Yeah, I mean, looking year-to-year variability and looking at 07, I didn't touch on it, but I did say there's some grad students across the country using our data set now. We had two grad students one grad student looked at climate and some predictive models and what could potentially happen if things warm up. What our data set says, and she did this big elaborate math, I'm not a mathematician, I got high math anxiety, but she did this big elaborate math modeling of our data set, and she basically, the result of the paper showed that for the eutrophic lakes, climate is not going to do much in terms of whether or not those blooms are going to come and go. It's the mesotrophic and the mildly eutrophic lakes that are more susceptible to changes in climate year to year. A warm year, you're going to see Sylvan Lake become toxic with microcystin, and I know that does happen. So even these lakes that we consider more pristine, or more desirable lakes for recreation, climate is going to have a bigger factor on those lakes than on the already eutrophic lakes. I mean, Baptiste Lake, which is high on the spectrum, or Nakaman Lake, it blooms regardless whether it's a cold year or warm year. So, now.
Are the dominant bloom species in Pigeon Lake typical of this part of Alberta? Like, I haven't seen too many Gleotridae.
No, you know what? Pigeon Lake is proven to be, and I think we need more data from Mark's group on the ID. We have old data on the identification and enumeration of the various species that we can go back to, and we will have to. Mark's pulling more data from the beach monitoring program, looking at ID and counts. So we need to look at that. But from my observations, Pigeon Lake is somewhat different than other typical scenarios in the province. Typical scenarios would be a phanozomenon translating or moving into a microcystis-dominated community, or as the season progresses. Pigeon Lake having Anabena, having Lingbia, and another, other species, very little microcystis, which is good. Microcystis produces microcystin. Pigeon Lake's a different scenario, and I don't know, because of the physical nature of the lake that's polymictic, and there's some factors there that are obviously, I think, speaking to a different community than the typical scenario in Alberta.
Yeah.
And that's good because lower toxicity, likely, hopefully.
Yeah, it's kind of-
Lingbia in 2006 was a bit of an exception in Pigeon Lake. We haven't really seen it since.
I've seen it in one other lake since then.
It typically goes from Gleotrichia to phanozomenon, and then to Anabena and Pigeon.
It is a more diverse community of cyanobacteria, but in 06 was a massive, persistent community. Again, in 07, that warmed up for all the other lakes were bad in 07. Pigeon Lake wasn't particularly bad in 07 compared to 06. 06, there was something different in Pigeon Lake in 06. And whether or not that's, I can only, I have no hard data to say it's available nutrient coming from the watershed, but I have some suspicions that Runoff year was different, was worse for Pigeon Lake that year, and we just had available nutrient. We had clear water at the beginning of the season, but available nutrient, and it caused significant, because Limbia grows on the bottom first and then comes up. So you need good water clarity for Limbia to grow on the bottom.
So does Gliotrichia.
And bleach, yeah, absolutely, because again, resting stages are on the bottom, you need the clear water. So something happened, Pigeon Lake in '06 was, I mean, very unusual year in my 20 years of tracking blooms in the province. Odd,
Yeah.
but it caused a lot of grief for the residents and of course for us.
So it looks like the sediments have something to do with this.
We're all hungry now?
Just a quick question, Ron. Do you have the sense that the new environment minister will continue to go on with the momentum of the previous one?
Well, Aaron from OMS met with the minister today.
Yeah, we had a meeting this morning. But it was really meet and greet. We were with, of course, 5 other groups.
I will tell you that, I mean, the Alberta Water Council, which does take on the various projects, they're going down the road of, you know, picking up what OMS put forward as a statement of opportunities for a lake framework. And that would guide our policy development. And my understanding is the Water Council has agreed to pick that up as a project. That's going to create recommendations to the government in where we need to go for water policy development on lakes. So this is really the starting point.
That starts in June.
And that starts in June.
Project.
And the last thing I want to say, that we had another grad student, again, Eastern Canada. She looked at the Baptiste Lake paleolimnology. This is a paper that just is coming out, and Baptiste, it appears Baptiste Lake was nutrient rich 150 years ago. So for Alberta, our lakes are somewhat meant to be green naturally. So it's not just, you know, green lakes predate European settlement in this, you know, in Canada. Plain, it's as simple as that. Yes, there's going to be cases where lakes are impacted by our recent activities, certainly. Now, hopefully we can address that. But I understand that it's a natural condition. How far back we can go in terms of water quality and trophic status is a good question. Or how far back should we go, I guess, is really a fundamental question.
Okay, thank you, Ron. I see lunch is here.